Lesson 32. The Selfish Giant. Every afternoon, on their way home from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a large, lovely garden, with soft green grass. Here and there over the grass stood beautiful flowers like stars, and there were 12 peach trees that in the springtime broke out into blossoms of pink and pearl, and in the autumn bore rich fruit. The birds sat on the trees and sang so sweetly that the children used to stop their games in order to listen to them. "How happy we are here!" they cried to each other. One day, the giant saw the children playing in the garden. "What are you doing there?" he cried in a very gruff voice, and the children ran away. "My own garden is my own garden," said the giant, "and I will allow nobody to play in it but myself." So he built a high wall all around it. He was a very selfish giant. The poor children had now nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and full of hard stones, and they did not like it. They used to wander round the high wall when their lessons were over, and talk about the beautiful garden inside. Then the spring came, and all over the country there were little blossoms and little birds. Only in the garden of the selfish giant it was still winter. The birds did not care to sing in it as there were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom. One stiffle flower put its head out from the grass, but when it saw that there were no children, it slipped back into the ground again, and went off to sleep. The only people who were pleased were the snow and the frost. "Spring has forgotten this garden," they cried, "so we will live here all the year round." The snow covered the grass with her great white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees silver. Then they invited the north wind to stay with them, and he came. He was wrapped in furs, and he rode all day about the garden. "This is a delightful spot," he said. "I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming," said the selfish giant, as he looked out at his cold white garden. "I hope there will be a change in the weather." But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. "He is too selfish," she said. So it was always winter there. One morning the giant heard some lovely music. It was really only a little linnet singing outside his window, but it was so long since he had heard a bird sing in his garden that it seemed to him to be the most beautiful music in the world. Then the north wind ceased roaring, and a delicious perfume came to him through the other window. "I believe the spring has come at last," said the giant, and he jumped out of bed and looked out. What did he see? A most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall the children had crept in, and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree that he could see there was a little child. And the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they had covered themselves with blossoms, and were waving their arms gently above the children's heads. The birds were flying about and twittering with delight, and the flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene, only in one corner it was still winter. It was the farthest corner of the garden, and in it was standing a little boy. He was so small that he could not reach up to the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all round it, crying bitterly. And the giant's heart melted as he looked out. "I will put that poor little boy on the top of the tree, and then I will knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground forever and ever." He was really very sorry for what he had done. So he crept downstairs and opened the front door quite softly, and went out into the garden. But when the children saw him they were so frightened that they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy did not run, for eyes were so full of tears that he did not see the giant coming. And the giant stole behind him and took him gently down in his hand, and put him up into the tree. And the tree broke at once into blossom, and the birds came and sang on it, and the little boy stretched out his 2 arms and flung them round the giant's neck, and kissed him. "It is your garden now, little children," said the giant, and he took a great axe and knocked down the wall. And when the people were going to market at 12 o'clock they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen. All day long they played, and in the evening they came to the giant to bid him goodbye. "But where is your little companion?" he said. "The boy I put into the tree. The giant bee loved him the best because he had kissed him." "We don't know," answered the children. "He has gone away." Years went over, and the giant grew very old and feeble. He could not play about any more, so he sat in a huge armchair and watched the children at their games. One winter morning, he looked out of his window as he was dressing. He did not hate the winter now, for he knew that it was merely the spring asleep, and that the flowers were resting. Suddenly he rubbed his eyes in wonder, and looked and looked. In the farthest corner of the garden was a tree quite covered with lovely white blossoms. Its branches were all golden, and silver fruit hung down from them, and underneath it stood the little boy he had loved. Downstairs ran the giant in great joy, and out into the garden. He hastened across the grass, and came near to the child. "Who are you?" said the giant, and he knelt before the little child. And the child smiled on the giant, and said to him, "You let me play once in your garden, today you shall come with me to my garden, which is paradise." And when the children ran in that afternoon, they found the giant lying dead under the tree, all covered with white blossoms. DODESRLL, adapted from The Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde. A. Match the following words from the passage with their meanings. 1. Selfish. A person who only thinks of himself, herself, with no thought for others. 2. Blossoms. Flowers. 3. Gruff. Rough, hoarse. 4. Cloak. A loose garment that hangs from the shoulders. 5. Linnet. B. A small brown and grey bird. 6. Perfume. Or pleasant, often sweet, smell. 7. Farthest. C. Most distant. 8. Bitterly. A. In pain and unhappiness. 9. Companion. D. A person with whom time is spent, here, a friend. 10. Feeble. F. Weak. B. Answer the following questions. 1. Describe the giant's garden. Answer. The giant's garden was large and lovely. It was covered with soft green grass, and over the grass, here and there, bloomed flowers as beautiful as the stars. There were 12 peach trees that in spring bore flowers of pink and pearl, and in autumn were laden with fruit. 2. How do we know that the giant was very selfish? Answer. We know that the giant was very selfish because he was very angry when he saw the children playing in his garden. He asked them why they were playing there in such a gruff voice that they were frightened and ran away. He then said that his garden was only meant for him, and he built a high wall all around it so that the children would not be able to come in and play there anymore. 3. Why did spring not come to the giant's garden? Answer. Spring did not come to the giant's garden because he had driven the children away from his garden and had built a high wall all round it to keep them away. 4. Who came to live in the garden and what did they do there? Answer. The snow and the frost came to live in the giant's garden when they saw that spring would not come there anymore. They invited the north wind to come and stay with them. The snow covered up the green grass with her great white cloak, and the frost covered the trees so that they looked as if they had been painted with silver. The north wind, wrapped in furs, roared all day about the garden and found it a delightful place. 5. Why did the giant think that spring had come at last? Answer. One morning the giant heard a little linnet singing in the garden. He had not heard a bird singing in his garden for such a long time that the bird's song seemed to him to be the most beautiful music in the world. The north wind had also ceased to roar, and a delicious perfume came through the open window. This made the giant think that spring had come at last to his garden. 6. What did the giant see when he looked out of his window? Answer. When the giant looked out of his window, he saw a most wonderful sight. The children had crept back into the garden through a hole in the wall that he had built, and were sitting in the branches of the trees. In each tree there was a child, and the trees were so glad that the children were back that they were gently waving their branches over the children's heads and had covered themselves with flowers. Birds were flying about and twittering with joy, and flowers were peeping out once again over the grass and laughing. Only in one corner of the garden it was still winter. 7. Why was it still winter in one corner of the garden? Answer. In one corner of the garden it was still winter, for in that corner a child was wandering round, crying. He was so small that he could not reach up to the branches of the tree there and so could not climb up and sit in the tree. 8. How did the giant help the little boy? Answer. The giant's heart melted when he saw that sight. He crept down from his room into the garden, and quietly went up to the child, picked him up gently and put him into the tree. 9. What did the giant see when he looked out of his window one winter morning when he was old and feeble? Answer. One winter morning, when the giant was old and feeble and was sitting in his armchair, he looked out of his window and suddenly saw a sight that he could not believe. In the farthest corner of his garden stood a tree all covered with white flowers. From its golden branches hung silver fruit, and under the tree stood the little boy that he had helped and loved. 10. What did the little child say to the giant at the end of the story? Answer. The little child told the giant that as he had let him play in his garden, the child would take the giant with him, and let him play in his garden, which is paradise. C. Fill in the blanks with appropriate prepositions. 1. To protect his kingdom from his enemies, the king built a high wall all dash it. Answer. Around. 2. The people were standing dash the road, waiting dash the bus to arrive. Answer. On. 4. 3. The room was so full dash furniture that it was difficult to place even one more chair dash it. Answer. Of. In. 4. Tom is very lazy and is always late dash replying to any email that he receives. Answer. In. 5. It was winter, and the ground was all covered dash snow. Answer. With. D. Change from direct speech to indirect speech. 1. The giant said, "What are you doing there?" and what he or she, they were doing there. 2. How happy we are here. They cried to each other. Answer. They cried to each other that they were very happy there. 3. This is a delightful spot, said the north wind. Answer. The north wind said that that was a delightful spot. 4. I believe the spring has come at last, said the giant. Answer. The giant said that he believed that spring had come at last. 5. Who are you? Asked the giant. Answer. The giant asked him, who he or she was.